We're live. How's it going, everybody? Welcome to Advanced Refrigeration Podcast. Kevin and I decided to do a live stream, even though Kevin is thoroughly against these. I don't know why. Probably because I don't know. What are you up to this week, man?
Well, currently I'm trying to get my computer to stop seizing out 1 second. Trying to get all the text messages to stop.
Oh, Jesus. Turn it on silent.
I'm trying. Facebook Messenger is like the devil with that.
Well, tonight we wanted to do a little Q&A session. We haven't done these in a very, very long time, and we thought maybe it was about time. So any refrigeration-based questions that you want to ask. Jesse, I know you're out there probably already trolling. We're not going to do that. But what are you up to this week, man? What are you doing? Is it still hot as hell up in Chicago?
Yeah, so it kind of like tanked and everything was okay, and then it Labor Day weekend and it went back to like 99 degrees. So today was like 96, so it was like nasty, muggy, just like disgusting.
Awesome.
So I am currently trying to get electricians to pull wire through the ceiling without completely screwing it up and tanking my job, and it's not going well. Some new electricians, and yeah, this old guy that doesn't want to listen to any instructions whatsoever. So it's going swell. It's not going good. And
So
I mean, you screw up pulling the wire, it like just doubles the amount of time for everything else.
Are you talking about like pulling communication cable, free hanging?
Pulling like temp sensors. So
yeah, I saw the picture you sent me. It was like I don't know. They tied about 300 feet on top of the case in a big pretzel.
Yeah, and I went to go help them towards the end of the day pull it through, and it was a nice tangled up mess, and it just cost a ton of time. And yeah, I was pretty pissed off when I left.
Well, since you're talking about it, how much do you typically leave? I mean, at the end of the run,
As little as possible, because
so
it's
just enough to get to the first junction box.
To wherever it needs to go. Like it triggers the shit out of me when there's like 50 feet of extra wire, because it takes so much longer to trim everything out and make it look nice, and like it's all tangled up. And remember one time we were doing a Costco, and I got there and they pulled like 250 feet of extra wire. It was all the way in the retention pond behind the rack house at one point when it was stretched all the way out. And people were running it over with cars in lulls as I'm trying to like pull this stuff out, and I had to lay it out in the parking lot, which it was screwed anyway. So it's like then I'm trying to untangle all that shit and find the the case temp sensors, all A, B, C, and D. Yeah, I wanted to like just literally eat a bullet at that point.
Nice. Did you work Monday? Did you work yesterday?
No, I didn't work yesterday. I worked Sunday morning.
Why?
Because they were slam busy on calls, so there was a bunch of calls sitting from the night before. So I figured I couldn't work on Monday, so I helped out on Sunday morning.
Gotcha.
Same guy was on call 3 days in a row, so.
Well, no traveling for me this week. I'm at home. I finally blocked out a whole bunch of time on my schedule so I could focus on some of the crap I needed to get done. But next week I go back to Houston and, keep on chumming away on that. I'm expecting a delivery date from Andre for the CO2 drainer, and then still working on getting all the VRF stuff put in, which, that's just, I've never installed a VRF. So this is going to be really, really interesting.
It's basically a shitty protocol.
Yeah, basically. We'll see what happens.
A shitty, non-serviceable protocol.
Yeah. Well, tonight was supposed to be a Q&A, looking for any questions that you guys might have about any kind of refrigeration system that you're working on, whether it be single systems, self-contains, ask us the gambit. It's fine. In the interim, what kind of service calls were you running this weekend?
Well, I ran one call, and it was to a store that has had some issues here lately, and a lot of dryers have been cut out of cases, and a lot of guys have been adjusting superheats. And then one guy went back and changed the dryers out at the rack,
Hmm.
and the receiver level went to nothing.
So
And
there was that much restriction.
I apparently, and then it just kind of got pushed to the wayside, and then it started flooding out.
Pat wants to know why you look like you're in witness protection.
I don't know. This is my shitty ass computer. But so it started flooding out to the point where like I've never seen flood back this bad on a scroll rack. Like to the point where like I walked up on the roof and it's like they sound like weed whackers. So usually it's coming down the subcooler.
Hmm.
Like looking, I'm like, yeah, it's there's ice on the discharge line.
What?
So I'm like looking at it, I'm like, holy cow. And then like I start tracking it down. There's like 5 different circuits to spike and defrost and spike the suction temp. So I'm like looking at it, I'm like reading through the notes. I'm like, oh, come on. So it's like the receiver levels at 0. It's bouncing from like 0 to 5. I'm like, well, I found a leak. Wasn't a very big leak. I'm like looking at it. I'm like looking at the trends. I'm like, it didn't look like there was a very big leak. So
Hmm.
I start looking at it. I'm like, well, I don't want to leave this because it's going to end up blowing up on the holiday. So I start going to cases and I'm like turning valves in like a turn. Nothing's happening. Turn them in another turn. Nothing's happening. Turn them in another turn. You start to hear it start throttling back a little bit. I'm like, okay. So go to another case, turn in like 3 turns, start throttling back. Like I think all together I adjusted like 12 valves in like 3 different lineups. And I've never seen this before. The receiver level went from 0 to 16%.
So there was that much liquid in the discharge line and in the suction line that basically was taking away refrigerant from your receiver level.
If you push a suction trader in, it was just pure wet. It was like if you pushed a liquid trader in like 18 pounds.
That's ridiculous. I
It was
mean,
pure liquid.
and I mean, everything else was running? Was subcooler running if it had one?
Subcooler was running. All the compressors were running. It was rack was pretty much maxed out. It was like a pound or two over suction. It was running. Like discharge was low. Condenser pressure was low because condenser had no load on it because it had no discharge temps.
You're shoving liquid directly in the condenser, so essentially you got rid of the total heat rejection.
It was super efficient. It was dirty as shit too. So I'm like, well, I mean, this is fucked up. So then after I adjusted all his valves and kind of just let it ride for a little bit and made sure nothing happened, it's like, well, this is not good.
And
So
that's why, like, I always talk about, ABC, air before charge. Worry about the air first, make sure everything that you're doing is straight, and then start worrying about the SST. And then like I said, the only other thing that you'd have to be left over is a superheat. And just opening up the expansion valve isn't the fix. I mean, I'm assuming what happened was they tried to open up the expansion valve, that didn't work, and then they went back to someone else went to go change out the filter dryers there at the store and at the rack. Is that what happened?
yeah, it was something like that. Somebody went and opened valves up and then cut dryers out of cases, and then another guy went back, and another guy went back, and another guy went back, and nobody ever followed back up on the other guys.
Hmm.
So that's how that ended up in that. So, and then there's in-house guys. So who knows what they did? I mean, so I mean that was my
I want to get your lookout on this. So Carl Klein's asking, what is the hope in getting techs back in the industry? Man, I think for years and years, I mean, even when I was in high school, a lot of people said that what we're doing isn't really, it's going to college is really what's going to make you successful, right? And I think a big lack in not doing that, caused the trades to, diminish, and it's been on a uh, downward slope for quite a while. I mean, I think it comes down to trying to. At this point, I think it's up to the contractors to basically do the training, because I don't know what you're seeing out there, but a lot of the new guys that we get from from a lot of these trade schools, I mean, if they say they're certified after what, 2 weeks, and they're HVAC certified, but we end up as a trade end up, you know, uh, having to train these guys out in the field in order to train them everything. So I don't know. I think it's going to have to go back to the actual contractors training these guys up. What are your thoughts, Kev?
I think the customers and contractors need to stop lowballing everything, and then, I mean, guys will come back. I mean, the customer has way too much power in what we do, unfortunately, and I mean, it drove everything down to pennies. So there's the money to pay the good guys isn't there anymore, and then the money to train isn't there anymore because everything's bare bottom, bottom dollar everything now, and there's just no money for it. So yeah, that's why everybody's driving out of here. I mean, with us, you can go make the same amount of money running HVAC calls as you can do refrigeration and not have to deal with the on call.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no reason anybody should be leaving their house at 2 o'clock in the morning for one case running warm. It should be, the case should get pulled, and that should be the end of it. I mean, there's no reason. I mean, you're not selling product out of that case at 2 o'clock in the morning. I mean, pull the case. Somebody be there at 7. I bet you if the customers stop calling in these calls like that, it would dramatically reduce the amount of people that are peeling out of here in their 30s and 40s that are just getting ran into the ground all night long, running stupid self-contained calls and other stuff. I mean, there's no reason anybody should be working on a self-contained at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. Well, the market's getting super competitive as far as refrigeration techs. I mean, but like you said, what has to happen is that when you start being able to charge more for our services. I mean, look, chiller techs, some billable rates are 120, 130. Sometime in California, $200 an hour.
Go to a car dealership, $175 an hour for a diesel mechanic. I mean, they're not getting paid that. It's $175 a billable hour at a car dealership.
Damn.
So you're talking $175 a billable hour, and they have the volume, never-ending volume, and I mean, they're charging it. I mean, that's always been like the argument here. Oh, we get the volume of calls. Well, I know HVAC shops that guys sit at an account every day.
Yeah, I mean this year I've seen more people quit to go do HVAC chiller work, light commercial, not light commercial, but like I don't know, 20 tons of air and above.
Because they're not being tracked on third-party tracking apps. They're not being, micromanaged with that stuff. I mean, that's a lot of it too.
Yeah. Carl also has a very valid point. Refrigeration used to pay about 20% more because of the on call. And, with people leaving the industry, the work-life balance is just getting just horrendous. I used to work a lot of hours just off of the fact that I enjoyed my job. So I didn't mind working the hours. I'd call the wife. I'd say, hey, do you mind me working late? And then I would try to, make it worth it by, maybe training some more technicians as well. You know what I mean? But
Yeah,
it's,
it used to be that they used to get that extra pay, but I mean, that's gone now. The HVAC side's caught up,
yeah.
but
Well,
it's just not there anymore. Like the margins aren't there.
what do you think about getting younger people in there? How do we get them in there? How do we get them into the trade?
With us, it's completely different. I mean, they're coming in through the apprenticeship, but I mean, and finding guys off the street. But I mean, that's like other than that, like I mean, they have to want it. I mean, it's I don't know. More people are going to start peeling off into this as like the tech stuff like kind of winds down. But I mean, there has to be higher starting pay and starting salaries, and I mean, there has to be more money for it.
Yeah, the technology is not getting any freaking easier, right? There's so many, like before. What was it? You had Comtrol, you had Emerson, which is now Copeland, you had Danfoss, which at that point was like EIL, right? But now there's like 20 different types of EMS manufacturers. So then once again, depending on what region you're in, you need to learn all those things. I mean, what energy management systems do you deal with up in your area?
Danfoss, Emerson, Copeland, what do you name it? Microthermal, the Novar. Like, I mean, we do a ton of Walmart work up here, so like we do a ton of Novar stuff,
Mhm.
which is, I mean, obviously one customer, specific. And then microthermal, like we have a ton of microthermal. I mean, guys struggle with that. I mean, they don't see it every day. I mean, we have basically all four of them. Like RDM's up here a little bit here and there, but I mean, we have basically all four of them. So I mean, up here you got to know all of them, which is difficult. I mean, they're all different. They all have their own caveats. They all have their own issues.
I mean, I went to Corel this week, and I literally for 12 hours all I did was work on Corel shit. So like the CO2 pack controller, all the case controllers that they make, and it wasn't it all the parameters are a little bit different, and because a lot of these are European countries, the language is written differently. So the display screen they actually call the mask. If no one told me that, I wouldn't know what the hell that is. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of them breaking into stuff. It's I don't like the support like aspect to that.
Well, I mean, depends on where you're going. If you talk to Corel directly, I mean, it's fine. But a lot of problem is that a lot of different manufacturers, case manufacturers, rack manufacturers, they'll buy the actual controller itself and then load their own software in it. So now you can't go directly to Corel. You have to go to that manufacturer, where that manufacturer is already fielding those calls for energy manage or for for rack calls, case calls, and what have you. So it's exacerbating the tech support. I mean, that's another thing, right? So there used to be people available a lot, around the industry that you can call, and now it's dwindling down, and like you're waiting on call for 3-5 hours just trying to get some answers on something. Like you said you were trying to get a password. You don't have to name the manufacturer, but you were trying to get a manufacturer to answer your phone call for how long? 3 hours, 5 hours?
Yeah, it's about 3 hours just to change a couple parameters. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, that cost us money on a job. So, and it's ridiculous. Like my whole thing with that is like, okay, if like I have a Danfoss controller and I call Danfoss, doesn't matter who programmed it, they're going to help me. If I call Copeland with a E2 or an E3, doesn't matter who programmed or what custom programming in it, they're going to help me.
Correct.
Yep. Same if I call Microthermal, they're going to help me. Doesn't
Whoa,
matter.
like a question though. How about if it was programmed by another one that does use microthermal that does their own programming? Do they still help you?
50-50. I mean, depending if you get somebody who, can like that understands their programming. I mean, it's
Hmm.
not going to be the first level. We're talking about the one manufacturer that, I mean, yeah, their block logic is extremely ridiculously overcomplicated and can be cut in half most of the time. But yeah, it's I mean, you could find people that could help you. I mean, a lot of times even that manufacturer you struggle with getting people to help you.
Does Hill still have that Dixel shit controller that not even Hill knows to work on? I don't know which one you're talking about, Carl.
He's probably talking about the XMs, like the 679s and uh yeah, I mean they're still using them all in all the Hill cases that I mean again like those controllers get shit on all the time, but they have like really bad parameters in them.
Yeah.
I mean they work pretty good once you tune them and get them working right, but like the parameters they come out with are just not applicable for what they're running.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the same thing, like trying to understand, like trying to get the time to, be able to understand how that tuning takes, right? Because I mean, they're going to put in like the core link, the Husman core link, they have exact parameters for each individual type of case, whether it be a 6-foot case, 3-foot case, whatever, it's, but trying to understand the tuning. I mean, tuning itself on one thing before you can kind of just copy and paste might take you 2 or 3 hours. Well, we don't have that on the jobs anymore, and that's another unfortunate thing, right? We don't have enough time, to fully make sure that thing is not going to, it's going to work right, to make sure it's going to work smoothly, so we don't have these really high, dips and valleys, in the whether it be the superheat controlled discharge air pressure, it doesn't matter. if you can't get it to smooth out, then it's just going to be a pain in the ass.
Well, and then every other manufacturer is like just slapping these case controllers in for temperature control and defrost control and superheat control, and none of them are working properly because none of them have EPRs, and now they're all starting to realize that they're getting all this poor performance out of all these cases because they cheaped out and put EPRs and stuff because this is the one size fits all solution for it, and it's just terrible control. Like all the pulse valves look horrible when there's no EPR there, or same thing with the stepper valves. They all just look terrible when there's no EPR. You cannot expect something to control superheat when all the variables change like constantly. And then you have the EMS company come in and slap the one size fits all tune on every single case, and then they wonder why the store runs so bad. Well, you got this Hill case over here with an oversized valve, this Hussman case over here with a slightly undersized valve, and then you got this case over here where this manufacturer didn't know what valve to put in it, so they put one 3 times the size in there.
Or just getting the thing engineered right. I mean, a lot of times, and we've come to across with this where you have something that it has an oversized expansion valve based off of what the saturated that it originally was supposed to run, right? Because I mean, if the valve is running if the superheat, if the saturated suction was high enough, the superheat would be constant and wouldn't be so oversized. And the fact that we have situations like this where now we have to. Sometimes they have to re-engineer it and put a different nozzle in there in order to get it working right. I mean, you've seen that firsthand.
Yeah, like the last 5 startups we did where we had to go through and change every single nozzle and every valve because the OEM oversized them so much.
Mm-hmm.
And we were told that it's a electronic valve, so it doesn't matter.
No, I'm gonna disagree. I mean, I've seen. When I was working down in Florida, I was working on a Cascade / liquid pump overfeed. Essentially, had both. It was like if a Cascade rack and a liquid pump overfeed had a baby, that's what it would spit out. And it was a really neat idea. What they did was they had separate loops for the frozen food, and then they had one separate loop for the suction. So what they were doing is they had a pressure transducer on the frozen food side. They had an EPR right there, a CDS valve, and that CDS valve then fed directly into the low temp. And especially with any refrigerant, but especially CO2, if you're cycling on and off, the compressors don't like it. Because then you're changing all the variables. You're changing how many compressors come on. If you're changing how many compressors come on and the frequency of how many times those compressors come on, that's going to change your load going to the discharge side, going to the gas cooler. So that's obviously going to change the how the HPV is going to open, which if it's letting out more refrigerant out of there, then that's going to change the way the BGV is going to be affected. But in this application, they basically kept the pressure just high enough that the cases would maintain the temperature that they're supposed to have without them physically shutting down.
So we did a couple test stores, and we ended up raising the loop temps up. So we had some Hussman ID cases on there with a plus 28 SST. Mm-hmm. Well, the main loop was at a plus 18. We went from terrible, absolutely horrendous valve control to almost steady, perfect valve control by raising the loop temps up to run a plus 28 SST, mm-hmm. and gave those valves a constant suction temperature, and they just maintained superheat a million times better. And then we were floating the EPR up off the average of a bunch of the cases, so that way even if they started making temp, it would start floating the EPR up and maintain the loop temp up to 29, 30 degrees if we needed to.
Yeah,
it was actually sitting around 29 and a half. So I wanted to bring something up, which maybe you've talked about this a million times probably. So the Cascade racks. So you have, we'll say 134A and CO2, low temp, CO2, 134A medium temp.
Mm-hmm. So you're gonna maintain 18 degrees saturated on the Cascades via the EPRs on there. And
so no EPRs.
Oh,
just goes right from the suction of the condenser for the CO2 right into the rack, mm-hmm. the 134 side. I have disabled the desuperheater for the last like 4.5 months through summer, and this thing has never ran better.
Yeah, but aren't you afraid of overheating the heat exchanger?
So, the way this thing kicks in is it like at 90 degrees, it kicks on and starts running it through the coil, and then
Mm-hmm.
at like 95, it brings the fan on.
Mm-hmm.
So it's still going through the coil. That it still has that operation, but the fan is off.
Okay.
We've always had oversized valves in here, and it's right between two sizes,
Mm-hmm.
so it's in a weird spot, and it's always had problems with the valve control because of it. Because if you put the smaller valve in, it can't maintain, and if you put the bigger valve in, which it has, it hunts all over the place. So after me disabling the uh, desuperheater
Mm-hmm.
coil, this thing has been steady loaded like 50-60% on the valves.
Hmm.
Stop losing compressors,
Okay.
steady load, steady valve control, no longer hitting below like 30%. It was going down to zero constantly.
Mm-hmm.
Steady control, steady superheat, rack just like flatlined.
Really? See, the problem that so we have a couple, and it's not one manufacturer. There's two different manufacturers that I've seen with the Cascade system that end up doing this, where you have 16 saturated for the medium temp for the rack, right? And then all the racks that I've seen, if they don't have EPRs, we do install them right on the heat exchangers, maintaining 18. Usually at that point, if you're running 6 to 10 degrees of superheat, you get about a 7-degree TD. So then in turn, you get your 25-degree CO2, which is, your 450, PSI on your vessel side. What I've seen is, because that is the lowest SST on that whole rack, and they never satisfy, but all the rest of the cases downstairs satisfy. Well, when they do that, I mean, you have all these pulse width valves. Probably, I want to say 80% of them will be satisfied, maybe even more. And when that happens, we have that weird liquid rivering effect. Even you could have 50-60% in that receiver and you still have that bullshit going on. And then because you're not getting an adequate amount of flow, that's what causes these valves to hunt. It's not necessarily the change in load. I see what you're saying as far as if you keep the load, pretty steady, you'll have that. But I have seen where it just hunts all over the place.
So we had the same thing and does the same thing at times. You float it higher, it gets better. But my thinking behind this is we keep the load up enough with the chiller loaded up more
Hmm.
that it makes up for the valves downstairs closing.
I got you. So you're saying the lack of load downstairs, you're just basically transferring that load up to the expansion valves that are doing essentially the condensing function of the CO2 side.
Which are almost half the rack load.
Agreed.
So keeping those more stable,
Hmm.
it cleared the rivering glass, keeping those more stable.
Hmm.
I mean, and I've never seen temps above like 75,
Hmm.
80 degrees, even when it's 90 out, coming into these things. I honestly think it's more of a programming and design issue. Like if you tanked the superheats
Hmm.
at the frozen doors,
Hmm.
it would let you run a little bit lower discharge temps,
Hmm.
and it would run so much more efficient because they run like a 10-degree superheat setting.
Hmm.
So run them at 6, get it down lower, and let the heat exchanger just take all the load instead of trying to reject it outside. I guess you're going to lose a little bit of energy efficiency. I mean, because you're losing a bit of that, but like I mean, with us, you walk the fine line when that fan comes on when it's cool out of condensing, and then trying to push liquid through those heat exchangers, and they can't do it.
Yeah. Well, one of the ideas that we had was just to arbitrarily try an EPR like on the main loop, set the loop up on an EPR, because we've had a problem where we had a rack that was short cycling like hell. It did have a regular standard unloader, but it did not have a variable unloader or a VFD compressor. And essentially what would happen is, you had a store full of pulse width valves, and they would all satisfy because your lowest SST on the whole rack was the positive 18. Well, now you have all these high efficiency cases, right, that are operating at 28, 26. And so the load just drops off. So you're constantly, loading, unloading, but then, you go even farther and then it has to shut off a compressor. So, just for shits and giggles, we talked to the engineer of this particular customer, and we're like, hey, I'm not asking for much. I was like, we want to take the two biggest loads on the rack, and just basically put an EPR on there. And we did that, and the rack just hummed. The cycles went from like 250 cycles a day down to maybe 30, 36. That's basically only probably because every single time those cases would go into defrost. And that was the other thing too. We staggered them up a little bit as well. But that seemed to help, load up the rack a little bit.
Yeah, this had a variable speed compressor, and when it wasn't blown up, it ran halfway pretty decent. But those things take a little ounce of liquid and they're just grenaded, let alone taking I mean, that liquid straight off that heat exchanger from it hunting.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was just destroying compressors. I mean, it's not their fault. They're just taking slugs. I mean, and then they're running 70 hertz. So taking a slug at 70 hertz is going to break a lot quicker. So, I mean, the EPR thing at this point would be kind of difficult because it's like a 3 5/8 line.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, getting it, you'd have to dual up a bunch of A8s. I don't know. Like this one had a lot of CDS valves too. So down at the cases. So that's where we were losing a lot of our mass flow. But as soon as I loaded up that heat exchanger, that rack just like went from the other compressors like 150, 200 cycles a day down to like 5. And it's found its like happy spot, like 80, 75% loaded, just purring. I honestly think the desuperheater makes more problems than it solves.
Well, there are some Cascade racks out there. They have the 3-way valve, which I'm not a big fan of. Where basically they're pouring the hot gas, into there, but then it remixes with, potential liquid that's being created. But the thing I don't like about it, whenever it does that, I sat there for probably about a good 3 hours trying to figure out why I had a 30 to 40 pound drop from the actual discharge to the receiver pressure. And I was like, every single time that it tries to control all the way down to 95, it basically causes so much of a pressure drop that it causes that pressure drop. And if that pressure is already higher, now we have a higher vessel pressure, so you're fighting that as well. So the rack's more susceptible to go off on high reservoir pressure because of that.
So funny story about those. So we have a TC rack we did up in Michigan, and this is the first time I've ever seen a manufacturer do this. Is we had a transcritical rack. It was 2 low temps, 2 medium temp racks. So standard TC medium temps. So no cascades or no transcritical.
No low temp.
Yeah, no low temp. Just transcritical with just medium temp. And then you had 2 cascade, or not cascade, 2 transcritical low temp, medium temp racks. The only load on the 2 low temp racks for the medium temp side was the low temp and then the prep rooms. So they ran a higher pressure. Now, what they did is they took the discharge of the low temp compressors and it went through a 3-way valve. So it could either go up to the roof and go through a pass in the condenser, or it could go straight into the medium temp suction.
Okay.
So we're doing this. It's December, and we are in Michigan, and it's like 15 degrees outside, and we're trying to get these racks going, messing around with this. The EMS contractor or the EMS company had no idea about this valve. It was in the program. They didn't know what it did. They're messing around with PIDs and stuff, and they forced this thing open after we left. This thing forced all that gas up through into the condenser loop. Now, mind you, it's 20 degrees, 15 degrees in Michigan. It all condensed. It flooded. It forced just pure liquid in and out of the condenser into the medium temp.
Damn.
Yeah.
I mean, I get, because I mean, I've seen where I haven't seen it physically. I've heard of, actually, when we talked to Wayne, he was bringing that up where, sometimes in those really low ambience, instead of running it through the gas cooler, they'll either bypass it directly into the flash tank, or the other option is to bypass it in some sort of heat reclaim coil. Right?
Yeah, I mean that's a great way to do it, but to me the risk isn't worth the reward because that valve stuck, wiped out 4 pumps.
Oh my God.
Just smoked them.
Yeah,
I mean, just pure liquid.
Because what do you do at that point? I mean, there's. So wait a minute. So I guess there was no hot gas dump on there, or it didn't matter how much hot gas you dumped in there.
It didn't matter. Like, I mean, the hot gas dump. I mean, you would have had to be dumping like a, straight 7/8 line in there at that point because it's just dumping pure liquid from the condenser into there. Because that gas was going up from the low temp compressors. It was going through the 3-way valve up into the condenser loop, and then condensing in the gas cooler. It's a vertical gas cooler, so it's a horizontal V gas cooler. So all that wind was going through it. It was fans weren't running. It was condensing, dropping back down right to the suction header.
That's awful.
I mean, I would see it in like a high discharge temp. You could ditch some of that, but I really have that extra space for gas cooler, a little bit more gas cooler capacity.
So I guess when using that method, it would probably behoove an engineer, to not do that where it does drop down all the way down to 20 if they're going to do that route. On a higher ambient where it doesn't have to go, or where it has to go through that pass all the time, right?
Yeah, I mean, if it's higher ambient and it actually has the superheat on there. But that's the thing, like I don't understand, like with the low temp, everybody lets the superheat be like 50, 60 degrees in these compressors. They all have the superheat set point way too low on the low temps, and they're cooking them. Like I'll end up floating the superheat way down on the low temp and letting it run a little colder so that way you don't have these issues.
Well, apparently, because I was doing some reading in one of the bits or documents, that they said that on the subcritical compressors. Now I'm not sure what the TC ones are, but on the subcritical compressors, they want a minimum superheat, I think, of 36 degrees.
Yeah, I mean, most of the ones I see are 50 to 60.
On the low temps, are you talking discharge superheat or suction superheat?
Superheat.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean, even if you look at the advancer set points for their liquid injection, right? It's usually set at between 36 and 50.
Yeah, way too high, and then they run the discharge injection way too high too. Like it needs to come on sooner on the medium temp.
Well, I mean, someone had said it was because of the oil, and the way that those compressors are lubricated, right? They don't have a regular conventional oil pump. They have the
Slingers.
I call it a slinger, and someone yelled at me. It's not really a slinger. It's actually, a cup that scoops it up, and then, gravity feeds it right down the crank. But, the idea is the reason why the 36 degrees of superheat or higher is because if you have the superheat coming into the ass end of the compressor too low, it's going to, cause the viscosity of the oil to be too low, and then in turn it won't lubricate properly. And that's what I was told on the Copeland scrolls, because you were talking to me the one time and you were saying, hey, I got a whole bunch of these going bad. And yeah, cycling is going to do that, but also if your superheat is too low on your scrolls, it doesn't allow that oil to actually get up into the top bearing.
50-50 with that, because I've seen Copeland scrolls just drink liquid like it's their job. for forever and they're fine. They just take it. And then like I've seen ones where they get like a few drops and they just grenade. But I mean those Copeland scrolls are tough. I mean, like the ones I just seen, like I mean, those things were drinking liquid for at least 3, 4 weeks. Like, not even drinking liquid; they were just pumping it.
See, I've never seen one where it was actually freezing on the outlet. I had a 5H. They had a facility out in it was out in Connecticut, and every so often, no, okay, this was around when we had the big hurricane out there. I want to say Sandy, and it took out so much power. So we were just putting up generators all over the place. Well, they had already pre-ordered the generator before I got out there, and then come to find out the generator didn't have a big enough tank, so they were empty on diesel within 6 hours. So they're like, yeah, we need a bigger generator. So they sent out a bigger generator that had a bigger fuel tank, but the capacity was lower, and it would run fine when all these big 50 horsepower 5Hs were running. But as soon as you hit a little bit of defrost, like those big POS walk-ins, because if no one knows, it's almost like a Costco, this facility I was working at. And yeah, all of a sudden the voltage would go from 480 down to like 393 and then just shut down. So what was happening is all the valves were continuing to feed because they were, everything was going down, but they had a little bit of enough voltage to run because the compressors would shut off and then just keep feeding liquid. So I had the discharge line was cold, but it wasn't freezing. And that's when I had the oil separator that was just completely just filled with liquid. I've never seen an oil separator fill up with liquid before.
Oh, I've seen it a couple times. I mean, we've had a few that have like just filled up with liquid so bad. At the Bullseye store, I've seen one fill up to the point where it's like liquid up to the split valves. It's just pumping that much liquid through there. And they take it. They sound like weed whackers, but they take it.
Not for that long though.
I don't know. These ones took it for at least a month, probably. Seen other ones that like it's been going on for 2 weeks, and it's like just taking it.
That's horrible.
I mean, they're pretty tough. I mean, the digitals don't take it. I mean, they're usually the first ones to go. Of course, it's the most expensive. There's just way too much going on there for it to take it. But I mean, the CO2 compressors definitely don't take it. They go quick.
No, and it's probably because it carry over with CO2 and oil. I mean that CO2, usually you can go down to like 10 degrees of superheat on HFO or HFC, and it'll take a little bit of oil out, but not it'll still run. But then on CO2, forget it. You get down to 10 degrees of superheat, and it just starts swallowing that oil up, just carrying it right past.
You could just watch it like at 10 degrees of superheat. You're going to start moving all the oil out of the medium temp. I mean, not so much the low temp. It's the medium temp that starts moving the most oil. And then once you get down to about 5, they just become oil pumps. Like it just starts washing them out faster than it can make it up.
Probably because the pressure difference, right? I mean, on TC, you could be running 1,400, 1,500 pounds, and you have your low temp or your medium temp suction at 400, 420 pounds. So you already have more velocity than what you would on a low temp compressor. Would you agree?
I mean, yeah, you're gonna have way more velocity, and then you have that cold wet suction too.
Oh, coming off the flash tank.
Yep, you have that cold wet suction. I mean, there's nothing you could do, especially if you're in a smaller store. Some of these advancer racks, these smaller stores, like an Aldi, for example, you got no load in the middle of the night. Like, I mean, your load is the flash tank in like a couple cases with like no load. So, I mean, you're gonna have a wet suction. There's nothing you could do around it. Like, you're lucky to get 15 degrees of superheat out of those racks in the middle of the night.
Oh, because you have no load.
And then here's the thing: like, hot gas injection is a great thing, but like, they don't do shit when you have no load. Can't rob Peter when Peter don't have any money.
Yeah, if your load's super low, your head pressure is going to be super low, right?
And guess what? Also is low when your superheat's low. Your discharge temps. So there goes your heat.
Oh, off the oil separators.
It goes your heat off the oil separator, but it also goes your heat injecting your hot gas injection.
Oh, right. So
And I,
before you could potentially have up to 200 degrees of discharge temperature going up in there, and then it gets tweedled down to what, 120?
yeah, I mean, so I've seen it 110, 105.
Damn.
I mean, you get nothing, and then you have a undersized solenoid in there. I will admit, Zero Zone puts the biggest hot gas injection solenoid I have ever seen on their racks, and it'll load the rack up, and it pushes enough hot gas in there to actually make it work. Like I gotta admit, their setup is by far the best.
No, the LNP racks, they don't even do that. They don't have any hot gas injection. They usually deal with just utilizing the heat exchangers, off of the drain leg. They usually have off the drain leg of the gas cooler, they'll have a heat exchanger where it's always getting that constant temperature of, I don't know, 70, 80 degrees coming down the pipe. And then, they decide with EPRs whether they're going to put that suction in there or not, just to raise that temperature. So we get a little bit higher of a superheat.
So I like that, and then I hate it because it's complicated and it's harder for guys to understand. And then when there's an issue, it's harder to troubleshoot. Now, Cargo does something similar.
Mm-hmm.
They do it in a way where they're using discharge gas. So what they're doing is they have heat exchangers and they're running the suction through a plate and frame heat exchanger on the discharge.
Mm-hmm.
So they're using Belimos, and they have a super high failure rate on the motors. So what ends up happening is you end up deadheading the rack. So which ends up blowing the reliefs on the TC side. But I mean, it works. I mean, it puts a shitload of heat in the suction quick. But again, you're adding complication to it.
Yeah. Someone's asking Envirogard and CO2 up north. Yeah, there's both up north.
I mean,
I don't know if that's your question or if that's what we're talking about. We're talking about CO2 currently, but
he said Envirogard or CO2. I mean, which one? I mean, me personally, I would prefer CO2. I mean, but out of simplicity, Envirogard. I mean, they both have their caveats that people struggle with, but I mean, Envirogard racks run great as long as they're set up properly, and everybody who's servicing them understands them, and you tweak and tune them. I mean, the biggest thing with Envirogard is having like a variable speed compressor. That was what Envirogard was missing to make it, just kill everything else. I mean, you add a digital or a variable speed to Envirogard, I mean, they just purr. But again, I mean, it all comes down to whatever you're trying to do.
Well,
I mean, go ahead.
I think one of the things is just making sure it's engineered for the area it's in, right? I mean, and that's one of the biggest dilemmas. I mean, a lot of the facilities that supermarkets are putting stuff in, they're basically buying a one-all catch-all for the most part. Like sometimes they put some extra high ambient strategies, obviously, farther down south, but being able to mitigate, what the discharge temperature is going to be, by means of maybe bypassing the gas cooler entirely, and making it go, utilizing that energy to, reheat to reheat some kind of air heat reclaim. I mean, the rack I just saw, I was up in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and they were utilizing, instead of sending the CO2 all the way out to the heat wreck, they were basically heating up either glycol for the air handlers or glycol for the for the thermal store tanks.
Absolutely hate that.
Why?
Because it's shit. You get shit heat transfer out of it compared to what you do. Like the Aldi DX stores, the amount of heat transfer they get out of the heat reclaim is insane.
Well, that's because you have that secondary media. You know what I mean? So you're either going to mitigate the charge, by lowering the charge by, running less piping and heat exchangers and all that other jazz, or you just run the glycol, like I said. So I see what you're saying, where you don't get nearly as much, sensible heat out of the CO2 because you're heating one media to heat up another, right? You're using the CO2 to heat up the glycol to heat up either the water or the air.
And then here's the other problem with it: the heat exchangers leak all the time.
Mm.
Like, oh yeah, we've had a ton of them leak.
As far as energy consumption, I think this is the same guy that
I mean,
talks about EnviroGuard.
I would imagine a CO2 rack and an EnviroGuard rack are going to be like on par with each other, but I'd probably say the CO2 rack would probably beat it in the wintertime. Not a shot in hell.
No, 100%, because I mean you're doing, compound compression, right? You're doing one compression ratio of like 2 to 1, right? And the other one you're doing probably, probably the same, 2 to 1, maybe 3 to 1. So I mean, if you're using an EnviroGuard, unless you be utilizing compound compressors, right? Because that's where a lot of your energy is expelled, right? It's the form of heat. So if we can reduce the compression ratio, it's going to if we can reduce the compression ratio, will get more energy consumption. So I'd have to say CO2 for sure.
I mean, CO2 in the wintertime, an EnviroGuard rack in the summertime just wipes the floor with it. I mean, when you're running transcritical and you're having to run up that load, I mean, you're never going to beat a DX rack in the summertime. It's not. All the data's there. It can't do it.
You think?
No, 100%. It is less efficient to use this transcritical CO2 rack in the summertime than it is a DX rack when you're running transcritical. With the load from the gas cooler and the flash tank, you lose every time to HFOs and HCFCs. So you're going to lose every single time. But in the wintertime, that's where that CO2 rack being able to run it like 40, 30 degrees. I mean, the EnviroGuard is going to be close behind it because, I mean, you got to remember, if it properly set up, you're running a 40, 30 degree condensing temperature. So I've seen EnviroGuards be running, a plus 20 SST and running a plus 30 condensing. Run 5 horsepower compressor on like a 70 horsepower rack.
10 pounds of pressure is enough to still push that gas around.
Yeah, it's literally a liquid pump at that point. There's so much subcooling. It is literally a liquid pump.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy. I've seen EnviroGuards where the middle of winter, we had that like Arctic blast a couple years ago. It was one that we were messing around with, variable speed compressor, and it was literally running at 30 hertz, and that was the only thing running, and it was just pumping liquid off the roof. The drain leg was an entire thing encased in ice, medium temp rack.
I've seen that. Michael Squires sent me a picture the one time. I've never seen it as far as where his went. Usually I'll see it like down to the holdback valve and maybe starting into the receiver. But the rack he showed me, man, it was pure ice all the way up to the liquid line solenoids. It was just insane. I've never seen that much subcooling on a rack.
Oh, the whole receiver was just like you could see the line in the receiver. Or where it was dumping in there. You could see the whole liquid line was frosted. All the valves, liquid line ball valves were frosted. Every single expansion valve in the store was a solid block of ice, but every case is a temp.
Yeah, and this guy right here, and I agree with that as well. I mean, you have you got to remember when you're running subcritical, right? You're running off of the load of the gas cooler, and usually you'll have about, I don't know, what is it, 70-30. So you'll get 70% production in liquid, you get about 30% in vapor. As soon as you hit that TC point, that transcritical point, now you have basically 50-50. You have 50% liquid and 50% vapor. Well, that 50% vapor has to get put somewhere. So where does it take us? It takes us to the load off of the medium temp compressors. That's why I'm really surprised on a lot of these facilities that they haven't started putting more parallel compression in there.
It's not worth it.
Really? I mean, because you're not having to pull. You're saving. I don't know. You'd have to figure out the compression ratio, but you're going up 18 degrees, right?
So what ends up happening most of the time is the parallel compression compressors sit idle for so long, and they end up causing more problems than they solve because the way they sit. Now, I bet if you started looking at some of this data and you took some of these racks and actually tuned them properly
Mm,
and ran the SST up higher in them, the plus 20, plus 23,
mhm.
and running plus 16 degrees and all these CO2 racks like all these manufacturers are, I bet it would become more efficient. And then the other thing is, like, everybody, you know, underrates the heat reclaim in here. Like, I mean, when you're running TC and you're getting that heat reclaim off of there, I mean, that is a serious amount of dehumidification you can get in the store. And you have to look at the thing as a whole. Yeah, is the rack less efficient? Yes. Is it making the building more efficient? Yes, because I mean, if you're able to dehumidify and heat the store back up and get that taken care of, I mean, you're going to save with the lower RH in the store. Is going to take a little more load off the cases.
Mhm.
It's cheaper to pull that out with the air conditioning than it is with the cases.
Yeah, especially when you have one mechanically cooled compressor handling the handling one. And I'm surprised they haven't integrated the rack refrigeration in with the air handlers. Like I've seen, when we were at AHR, we saw that one company. The name is eluding me right now, but they had a straight up, uh, you know, air conditioning system. But I think it was more for like box temperatures. But it was basically a rooftop unit that was TC, and then had like 140 bar setting pressure. So if God forbid something happened to it, you're not going to relief until you get up to 140 bar.
Yeah, it was a package unit.
Hmm.
Like they were dropping package units on their roof. I mean, that would kind of suck to work on. Like, I mean,
No, but
be,
if you were utilizing the rack, like if you upsize the rack enough where you're utilizing not just the an extra load of the refrigeration, but also the heat reclaim as a form of mitigating some of that time to lower some of the heat load going into the gas cooler, kind of
so
like this
I'm
does.
starting a project in like 2 months where we're the TC rack has the air conditioning load on it. It is doing the heating for the building. It is doing the refrigeration.
Hmm.
So it's doing everything. So three suction groups. It has an air conditioning suction group. It has, which is also going to be like parallel compression almost.
Hmm.
It has the uh the medium temp TC compressors, which will be running most of the year.
Hmm.
It has the subcritical, low temp compressors, and then it has geothermal, where it's pulling heat out and condensing in the wintertime, and then a gas cooler when the wells get in case the wells get overwhelmed.
And this is going to be in Chicago.
Yep.
Damn, that seems like it's going to run. I mean, it's the controls aren't going to be easy. I know that, but I mean, it.
It's either going to work really good or it's not going to work. And it's replacing something that already doesn't work. So
Oh, is that the
yeah, we can't, yeah,
yeah?
can't talk about it.
Okay.
We can't talk about it till it's in the works. But like it's yeah, no, it's going to be different. But I mean, you're going to see more and more of that because I mean, you could easily add the air conditioning to it. So if you were going to put the air conditioning on the rack, that's where the parallel compression would pay off.
Yeah,
Because,
because you'd be running a 38-degree saturated that would go directly to the freaking flash tank anyway.
yeah. So I mean, you could even run a 35-degree saturated on the that loop, and then run the air conditioning coils at 35 degrees. You're not going to ice up at 35 degrees, but you're going to be able to pull more moisture out because the lower you get that SST to freezing and keeping it there, the more dehumidification you're going to get out of those coils.
Well, the theory I think is going to have to happen is I think they're going to have to float. I think they're going to have to potentially float the flash tank a little bit if you're doing all that, right? So,
Because you have to raise your flash tank pressure up in order to accomplish the you know for the air conditioning.
which also actually means that your medium temp, I think, would get less of a load, right? Because if you're, because you're not going from like, let's just say at the minimum saturated the minimum saturated condensing temperature is usually what 75 degrees, right? On transcritical racks.
What 40?
40,
Yeah.
800 pounds. That's
We're,
usually where all the racks I've seen have all been about 800 pounds, 800 psi,
we're running down to 40 to 45 degrees up here is what our minimum is.
and still getting your differential enough to push that liquid out.
Yeah. Zero problems.
Just here's one. Just got home from work, got my ass kicked by an Adiabatic. You guys have good Gunter contacts.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's probably set up wrong. If you call Gutner, so the water is probably set up wrong, and the whole thing is set up wrong, probably. So if you call them, they will help you fix it. It dumps a shitload of water down from the factory, more than it should. I will admit, the more I work on these, the more I like them. Like it's like magic almost. Like they work. I mean, they do work. The problem is they aren't set up properly from the factory, and that controller is extremely difficult to set up if you haven't done a ton of them. And the other thing is the pad sensor. I found this in like multiple of them now. Like the nozzles in there will be shooting water at the pad. Will be shooting water at the pad, and it's hitting the sensor. So it makes it look like it's cooling the air down like way colder than it is. So it'll say the pre-pad will be like, or the post-pad will be like 70 degrees and it's 90 out. And you're like, holy shit, we're getting a 30-degree difference here. And you're not, or like the 25-degree difference, 20-degree difference, you're not. The sensor's getting wet. So one of my guys found that, and we ended up having to direct the nozzles away. And I've found it like 4 stores now.
Damn.
So it throws off like how good you think it's working, but if it's dumping that much water down, like it's generally the BLEMOs are either in the wrong direction, which I found in a bunch, or they're the GPM sensor's off, or how many liters.
Well, when you're saying the wrong direction, are you talking about clockwise and counterclockwise?
Yeah,
okay.
Like, flip it, but the 0 to 10 comes from their controller, but it's telling it to use, so it knows how many liters of water it's injecting a day and how many liters of water based on the humidity outside it's calling for. I have seen a shit ton of the humidity sensors fail. They all fill full of water.
Really?
Every single one of them I found has been like full of water. So we've been taking and siliconing them as soon as they come in and get unwrapped. I just take silicone and smear them on the outside on the edge of the box.
So either check the humidity sensor and make sure what did you call the one in between? Pad sensor?
The pad sensor is just an input to the EMS, but the humidity sensor is what's controlling your water. So, but you need to call Gutner, and they have this like awesome tech support app. Like I actually stole it and been using it for other stuff, but this is awesome like tech support app, like where they could FaceTime you on it, and basically, yeah. I tried to show you the one day, you ignored me, and then I've been using it a lot for like guys. So they'll walk you through it, but you need to call Gutner. I mean, they're on Chicago time, so they're in there like 8 o'clock in the morning. Call first thing, and they'll walk you through how to change the settings. I mean, they may even just email you a file and just dump it in there. Like I have a file for doing all these startups, like that I know, like it's already preset with an AO signal from a rack. So I just dump in the same file in. Everything's already set up.
Yeah, because the only thing that you're getting from the energy management typically on any of the gas coolers is just a signal.
Signals, faults at the Bullseye store. They're communicating with it now, so they're pulling data. They're pulling data from the GMM and the Rs, I think it is, the GMR. They're pulling data off of Modbus, and they're pulling the data into the controllers now, so they could see points, they could log points.
That just means we're going to get more alarms. Hey, this is using way too much water. Hey, this is using way too much, but it's nice because you should, at that point you should be able to graph it. did they make it be able to communicate with just Copeland right now, or are they working on other energy management companies?
It's open Modbus, so
Oh,
anybody they have the tables published, so anybody that can do Modbus can read the tables and do it. But like they just finished a description file for it, so little rough.
Yeah.
But it's functional. But it's the main problem with that controller is they're never programmed right. And then they all come out set up for standalone mode, and nobody wants them in standalone mode.
I guess probably just so it would run independently just for the time being until, because sometimes some of the communication cables, don't get ran all the way first, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's only one manufacturer I've seen run them in standalone mode. I'm not a big fan of that. I'd rather have control of it on the EMS. I think everything runs smoother when it's on control of the EMS, and it's just in slave mode. But if you're dumping that much water, like I shit on them in the beginning, they dumped a shitload of water, but they're all programmed wrong. But at the same time, it should come out programmed right.
Gotcha. Hey, one last question before we go. What do you, as far as when we're controlling the Adiabatic or dry cooler for CO2, most of the time they're doing TD control. What is your preferred method? Do you think it should be on TD control, and why not?
TD, SCT, 100%. Everybody does it wrong. It should be TD, SCT. Everybody wants to use the drop leg temp and control it off a straight set point, or TD off a drop leg temp, but TD off of SCT. Let it run off of pressure. It
So
runs
still do differential, but just have it done that way.
Yep, runs 1,000 times better. And then you lock it out at, say, 85 degrees. Once it gets to 85 degrees, you lock the set point, and then lock it so it can't go any higher.
I guess the theory behind that would be because you're constantly, the HPV is constantly controlling, trying to maintain that basically it takes the temperature of the drain leg and then figures out what pressure that would make that the 3 or 5 degrees of subcooling, and then that's what that HPV is doing. It's trying to maintain that pressure. So if you constantly have changing temperature, but then you're also ramping the fans up and down based off that temperature, you're basically having two controllers trying to control.
It's exactly
the same thing.
That's exactly what's happening, and it causes absolutely. I've posted a ton of things about it. Like it causes absolutely horrendous controls because you have controller A trying to control that HPV valve. Think of it like a flooding valve, like a A8 valve. It's on the drop leg. It's trying to control a set point, and then think about the fans. The fans are fighting it. So you have, say, 4 fans on a gas cooler, and it's 10 degrees outside, and you get to, like, say your set point's 50 degrees, and you get to like 55 degrees. Well, it starts bringing on all 5 fans at the same time because none of the manufacturers want to split the AOs up or use relays to kill the fans. Fan shedding is like the number one missed thing on these CO2 racks. So all 5 fans come out at the same time, 10%. Well, it's 10 degrees outside. That temp just dropped instantly before the EMS can even react, or the PID could wind back down. Now the HPV valve is crimping down, or it's opening wide up, depending on where it hit at. It's opening up because the subcooling just changed. And the other thing is, like with the iPro, it's not going off subcooling when it's transcritical. So it's going off of a pressure set point.
So they take what I explained, right? Is that what it's doing? It's basically taking that temperature. So argument's sake, let's just say the drop leg temperature is 60. All right, well, if I get up to 65 degrees saturated of pressure, technically I'll still have my 5 degrees of subcooling. Is that what you're saying?
So no.
Oh.
In the iPro, what it's doing is, this is from my understanding in talking to all these people and going back and forth about this. It is, so if you look at the iPro when it goes transcritical, the set point like switches over, and it'll sit at like 1,140 pounds when it first switches over. So you'll notice it goes to like this crazy number. Like it looks like something's wrong with it. So it switches to pressure control. So, and then it has a scale. So it's scaling, it's polynomial. This is what I was told is polynomial. So it's scaling that drop leg temperature, as it increases, there's a scale in there from minimum to whatever you set the TC max is, and it's running that scale through there. So as it goes up in temperature, that pressure set point goes up. So it's trying to maintain a pressure set point, not a subcooling number
when it's in TC.
when it's in TC.
What that's what I don't understand, because it's doing a fictitious, PT chart, right?
It is. So it's a fake fictitious PT chart. So it's nothing to do with subcooling. It's just converting what it thinks that temperature should be in pressure, what that set point should be on that valve.
Oh, so it's not even it's not even just there's an automatic, okay, this is this temperature, this is the pressure that we're going to maintain.
Yep.
Has nothing to do with fictitiously trying to control subcooling.
Nothing to do with that.
Because the 326 does work that way. Yes?
Yeah. Yes.
Ish. Yeah, I gotta get
Well, here's the deal with that. Like it does. It's trying to maintain a fake subcooling number. But like Danfoss doesn't publish any of those tables or charts or anything because it's all locked away. And it works. It works really well.
Well, I mean, theoretically, isn't there a U setting in there where it tells you the expected pressure of what it's trying to maintain at that point in time?
Correct. There's a U setting in bar what it should be at.
So you could,
I guess, if you sat there and fingered
1 degree at a time, just keep raising it. I'm like, okay, that was that pressure. Okay, that was this pressure.
Personally, I think the Danfoss controller is linear. Like, yeah. I think it follows a linear scale through there. I mean, we've been playing with the iPro and playing with the set points in there because you could play with the upper end of the table, and it's gotten better, but the lower end of the table struggles a little bit from where the Danfoss is.
Yeah, I see. I thought on Emerson Copeland, they actually show they have a table available. I thought, no,
they do for the stock. There's a setting called TCST where you could actually change the upper limit of the table, but as soon as you change that chart's in the garbage.
That's horrible.
So, I mean, you could plot it. We were going through the one day you could plot it, but I mean, it's way too much work for me.
I gotcha.
I'm in there playing with settings and trying to, see where it goes and, see how that goes. But like that whole thing, like of running off of pressure for the gas cooler works so much better because now you're not fighting with two different control strategies, trying to control the same thing. I mean, it's never going to work right. And it doesn't work right. Like that has been my biggest complaint with CO2 in the wintertime with how cold we get is the fan controls is absolutely horrendous. And it's so cheap to break up fans. Like it is. On the Gutners, you can't really do it. I mean, there would have to be some, they have that LLM mode, which slowly drops fans out. But I mean, in order to break up the fans, I mean, you're talking, so they use an analog output signal. Okay, so say you have a standard gas cooler or condenser where they all come on and off at the same time. It is a relay board. And you run 12 volts off of the multiflex board. So you run the 12 volts off the transistor supply. You run that to the normally open of the relays. Run the signal wire coming off of the 4AO to the normally open of the relays. And the normally close of the relays. And then you run the fans off the commons. So when it goes to shut a fan off, it puts 12 volts DC at the fan motor.
Which is essentially make it go down to 0%.
Zero. And then when you want to run a fan, it switches the relay and it runs off the analog signal. You're talking cheap. What is a multiflex? You already got the multiflex board there. What's you're talking about running 4 cables to a board and split it up 5 cables. It would cost an extra $2,000 and save a ton of energy a year.
Yeah, because you have a lot better control.
That and think about the wear and tear on the fans. I mean, you're running one fan at 50%. I rather run that than 5 fans at 5 to 10%.
Yeah, Aaron. Yeah, they have. What'd you say? I know Aldi's does for sure. What other stores do you know of that run the CO2 right into the air handler for the heat reclaim coil?
I mean, Aldi's been the only one that I've seen actually do the TC heat reclaim. I mean, I know Costco does it up north, like in Canada and stuff. They run the docks.
Mm-hmm.
They take the dock and they heat the dock with it.
Mm-hmm.
So they just have like 4 or 5 coils in the dock, and they're using that to heat those areas.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they do it, but I haven't really seen them do it down here. But for sure, we're doing snow melt off of it up here, off the gutters. We use the snow melt glycol system, so we're heating that. But like, yeah, all these been doing most of it.
No, Aaron, it would be before the gas cooler.
Yeah, I mean, you still, depending on, I mean, if you're running air conditioned loads like an Aldi, like I was at one the other day, like the line going to the gas cooler was 65, 70 degrees. So this was with it being 90 degrees outside. It was like 65, 70 degrees going. You could probably bypass the gas cooler at the Aldi's.
With how much heat that it was rejecting off the heat reclaim?
Yes. So it was 90, 95 degrees outside. So the CES was running full tilt.
Mm-hmm.
And it was humid as could be. So it's running full dehumidification.
Mm-hmm.
So it's running that coil down to like 34 degrees. So that discharge air coming off the CES is cold. It's 55 degrees.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So I mean, you could technically, depending on the load, you could probably load shift off of that and transfer it back out of TC with a smaller store like that. I mean, Aldi and them are probably saving a ton of money with using that heat reclaim. Heat reclaim is probably one of the most underrated ways to make that cheaper to run.
Same thing with like a DOAS unit. I don't understand why they don't use CO2 more for the DOAS, the direct outside air units, because I mean you're using the refrigeration on one side and then you're using the heat reclaim to warm that up, and that CO2 would be amazing for that.
You imagine how much more drying capability you get out of the munners for the Desco wheel with 160 degree, 170 degree discharge air coming off of a CO2 coil versus what you get off a heat reclaim or off of the reheat off of a DX coil. They're running that compression ratio up on a compressor to the upper limit in order to get enough heat off of it for the react wheel.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because on those they have usually when it's running regular air conditioning, like on 410A, they're running 350 for the head pressure set point.
It's like 40 to almost 500 pounds.
It's 400. Yeah, I remember the set point. It's 444. It's 444 pounds is what they jacked that up to, in order to get a little bit more heat out of it, just to react, to regenerate the desiccant wheel. So, hey man, we're at an hour 18.
Yep, let's cut it. My wife's standing at the door anyway.
All right, guys, man. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you guys next time.